So welcome back to a third video. So there were a couple of comments in one of the other videos where people were asking to create a summary sheet. So in essence, doing what we'd done in previous videos, but in reverse. So obviously with the other videos, what we were doing is anything on this summary sheet, we were creating individual tabs based on the team name. What we're going to do now is we're going to look to reverse that process, so anything that's on any of these tabs will then become combined into one summary tab. So the first thing we want to do is create our summary tab and just have a blank tab or a blank sheet with our headers. So we've got our headers in there, so we've got rank, player, team, games played, games started, minutes, goals, assists, shots on target. And we've got our summary sheet. What we don't need for this is our unique sheet, so we can go ahead and delete that sheet. So as always, when we're creating an automation, we want to go into our apps script. So we go into extensions and click on apps script. When this opens, you'll see that we've already got our previous script, so we don't need any of that. So we're just going to go ahead and we're going to delete that, and we're essentially going to start from scratch. So we're going to go for a function because that's what we're creating. Now we need to give our function a name. So we're going to call this summary. We need our open and close brackets, and then we need our curly bracket. So as explained before, your curly brackets are just like the normal brackets on a formula. So where we have our open and closed brackets on a formula, we have the closed and then the open curly brackets on a function. So they look the opposite way around. In actual fact, they're not the same way around, but they can become confusing, and people that I've spoken to and gone through this with before, I've also got a little bit confused, thinking that the open is actually a close and the close is an open. In actual fact, they're the same as a normal bracket on a formula. So we now want to write our function within these curly brackets. So the first thing that we need to do is create a variable which we'll call on our active spreadsheet. So we need to give our variable a name. As explained before, I always go with SS for the spreadsheet. SS obviously standing for spreadsheet. I always keep them in lowercase as well. So once we've got our name, we now need equals, because equals is then going to tell the function what SS means. So SS equals, so we need to call on spreadsheet app, and then we need to call on the active spreadsheet, and then we put our semicolon at the end of that line. That closes that line off. So that's our first variable. So we're saying that we want to get the active spreadsheet, which is the spreadsheet that we're working on. Now we need to tally what sheet we want to look at. Well, first of all, we want to look at our summary sheet, because that's going to be the blank sheet, and that's where we're collating the data. So that is going to be sheet 1, or S1 for the variable. Equals again. Then we need to call on that active spreadsheet, so we're going to type in SS dot get sheet by name, summary. So now what we've basically said to the function is, okay, we've got our first variable, which is the active spreadsheet, the sheet that we're working on, the spreadsheet that we're working on. Then we want to look at a sheet within that active spreadsheet, which is the summary sheet, which we've called S1. Now what we need to do is call all of our sheets. This will be what we're going to use later for the loop. So we're going to go S1 variable. Then we need to call it a name, so we're going to call it sheets because that's all of our sheets, and that is going to equal the active spreadsheet, and we're going to say get sheets. So that's going to get all of our sheets. Now I'm just going to put a line of text, so loop through and collect data to paste in our summary sheet. So the reason I put this line of text in is if this function is developed a little bit more, where it becomes a long, drawn out, complicated function, at least if I've got to go back into that in 12-18 months time to fix something, I know what each section is actually doing, and it just makes it so much easier when I'm looking for an issue or I'm looking for something that I want to improve to make faster. So now we need to create a loop. So to create a loop, as before, you always start that with for, so for loop. So I is going to be the sheet that we're working on, and we need that to start at the first sheet, and we put our semicolon, but we want that to stop at the last sheet, so we've got to go sheets dot length, because obviously the length of the sheets, or the amount of sheets, is going to be the last sheet. So if there's 20 sheets, the length is going to be 20, therefore we want to stop at sheet number 20. Then I++, which is just going to continue to loop through until we've got to sheet 20, for example. Now again, much like a function, we need to wrap our loop within those two curly brackets. So the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to switch between the sheets. So if we're on 0, for example, we want to look at sheet 0. If we're on sheet 1, we want to look at sheet 1, so we need to switch onto sheet 1. So switch sheets, and the sheet that we want to look at is I. So if I0, we want to look at sheet 0. Then we need to get the sheet name. Okay, open and close brackets, and then obviously close brackets closes that off from the switch. So again, we now need to write that within this bracket, so it's like a nested function. Much like a nested formula, this is a nested function. So what we don't want to do is summarize the summary sheet. So we want to leave summary out of it. Okay, so what we need to do now is, if it is the summary sheet, we need to tell it what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to continue, so we want to skip over that iteration. Now what we want to do is, if it's not the summary sheet, what do we want to do? So this is where we start writing in our copy and paste, essentially. So the default. So again, we need to create a variable, because what we're going to do now is we're going to copy the information from I, or the sheet. So we need to create a variable. Now I would call this variable copy, because that's what we're doing. We're going to copy. So sheets. So we need to tell it now where we're copying from. So we're going to go back to that sheet, and we're going to have the square brackets with I, because that's what we're calling it. Then we need to look at the range in which the data is. So that range is row 2. So we're going to start at row 2 because we don't want to get the headers. Otherwise we're going to copy the headers over however many times you've got them same sheets or the same layout in your whole spreadsheet. So we're going to start at row 2. We're obviously going to start at column 1. And we want to end at the last row. So we want to get the last row of data. So again, we need to go sheets, the open and close brackets I, because that's the sheet name that we're on now. And then we want to go to get last row, open and close brackets. Now we've got that data, we need to look at where we want to end this range. And we want that to be sheets I dot get last column, open and closed. Now what we want to do is we want to get the values. Now we can do this in 2 ways. We can go get values. However, I don't like to do get values because I want to copy it in exactly the same way as it is in the spreadsheet. So I'm going to go with get display value. So what that'll do is if you've got a formula, for example, in there, and that formula turns out to be £2.36 or $2.36 or whatever currency you're using, it will copy that over as a currency. Or if you've got it as a percentage, like 36%, it will copy that over as a percentage. So we want to get the display value rather than just the value, because if there is a formula in there, it will copy the formula over and not that whole value. So for the purpose of this, we're going to go for get display values. And then we're going to have the open and closed brackets. And then your semicolon to finish that line off. So now that we've got this data, we need to paste it back into that summary sheet. So we're going to go to S1. Now we don't need to create a variable for this because it's not something we're going to call upon again later. So we're just going to go straight in to that line of data. So we're going to go for S1 dot get range. And the range is going to be the last row of data. So it's S1 dot get last row. Now when we're looking at the last row of data, that's going to be the last row where text appears. So we actually want to paste this in after that last row, so the row after the last row. Otherwise we're just going to override the data that we've got in there and it's not going to be a true reflection. So we're going to go +1. Now we need to look at the column that we're going to start at, which is obviously going to be the first column. Now we need to tell it how many rows are going to be in that data that we're pasting. So the easy mistake that everybody makes is they're going to go S1 dot get last column or get last row. Well, that's not going to work, because what you're essentially saying then is, well, you've got 1 row of data when in fact you could have copied 20 rows of data. So you need to go back into sheets I dot get last row. So essentially what we're saying there is if there's 20 rows of data, we've copied 20 rows. Alright, so that will now copy 20 rows and it will have 20 rows to paste. So you're not going to get an error. So that's the last row. Now we need to state the last column. Again, that is going to be sheets I dot get last column. For exactly the same reason as before, if the 20 rows of or 20 columns of data. We're copying 20 columns of data. If we was to do that in an empty sheet, it would have one column of data, wouldn't it? So it wouldn't paste, and it would come up with an error on the function. Now we need to set the values. And now we need to type in the name of that variable that we're copying on, where that data is. So that is in copy. Okay. So we've got that data. So we've got that script now. So if we was to run that, so what that's doing there is it's trying to call upon the old function that we've now deleted. What I should have done there before I ran it is I should have pressed save, and I wouldn't have got that. That error code. But doesn't mean to say that there's anything wrong in the function or the data or the script that I've written. It's just I didn't press save. So if I was to press play now, that should run without any issues. So we can see that if we go back into our spreadsheet, starting to paste that data. So that's now pasting that data. So something else I would do just to tidy this up is when it pastes it, it's literally going to paste it in the order that it's found in the sheets. So your ranking now is all out of order. So you've got 9 to 21 to 60 to 111, 112, 157, so on and so forth. What we should have done there is sorted that data, which is exactly what I'm going to do now. So to sort the data, really simple, one line of code or script. So s1 dot get range, then we open the column, so we open the brackets. Now we need to look at that range of data that we want to sort. So the range of data that we want to sort is going to start at row 2, because we don't want to sort the headers. We want to keep the headers where they are, so we want to start that at row 2. We also want to start that at column 1, and we want to go all the way to the last row. So it's s1 dot get last row, and then we want to go all the way to the last column. Okay, so now we've got our range of where that data is that we want to sort. It's really simple. Type in sort. All we need to do now is say which row of data or which column of data do we want to sort within that range. Well, obviously it's the first one, and we want it ascending. So we're not going to put anything else in there. If we wanted to set it as descending, we could literally type in false, for example. But we don't. We want it as ascending, which is how it's naturally going to come if we don't tell it. So that's exactly how we're going to leave it. So now if I save that, so what I would do now, I've got all this information, is I'll just put in one more line, which is going to basically say that every time we start this script, we're going to clear the data out of the summary sheet, because what we don't want to do is duplicate that data, especially if we're going to put it on a trigger. So s1 dot get range. So we need to do this outside of the loop, and we need to do it before the loop begins. So I would put it directly after my set of initial variables. So get range, we need to look at the range that we're going to delete out. So that's going to be row 2. It's going to be column 1, and then we want to go to that last row of data. And we want to go to the last column. So that's that set of data that we now want to clear. And then again, just very simple, clear. Now we're going to leave it blank because we want to clear everything rather than just one row, for example. So if I save that, I should now be able to run that, and that's going to clear the data initially and then start inputting it. And that's it for creating a summary sheet. If you found this video interesting or helpful in any way, again, as always, please like, comment, share, subscribe. If you've got any projects that you're working on, anything that you're stuck on that you're not sure how to do, leave a comment, and I'll try and include that in an upcoming video. Or you could always message me directly, and I'll try and help where I can.